conditions of those people can be improved.
People wanted government-issued money, silver in this case. The banks had forced America onto a gold money standard. Then they could cause a depression anytime they wanted to, merely by reducing the supply of gold money. When they return victorious to the wizard, Dorothy is asked to sew the wizard's getaway balloon out of green cloth. Then the wizard accidentally leaves without her. Fortunately, Dorothy is able to seek out Glinda, the good witch of the South.
Oh, will you help me? Can you help me?
Dorothy is then told that the power to solve her problems has been with her all along. She only needs to click the heels of her silver shoes together 3 times. Like Dorothy, America itself had the power to solve its problems simply by expanding the money supply, government-issued silver money. When Dorothy finally gets back to Auntie Em and Uncle Henry in Kansas, she finds that the silver shoes have fallen off her feet, just as the silver issue was vanishing in the late 1890s. And Baum was right. The silver cause would become a distant memory once the United States became firmly committed to the gold standard with the passage of the Gold Standard Act in 1900. The same year, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was published. L. Frank Baum never admitted embedding the symbols of monetary reform in The Wizard of Oz. Consequently, some fans vehemently deny that there is any connection. However, the period immediately after the book's release may offer some helpful clues regarding his motives. References to current affairs appear in a number of Baum's later works. In 1901, Baum worked on a comic opera entitled The Octopus or the Title Trust. This was while he was still trying to break away from writing any additional Oz books. However, the public pressure became too great as The Wizard of Oz continued to grow in popularity. Eventually, Baum appeared to lose all interest in politics as he became wealthy from having written what would become the most popular children's story in history. So what can we do about this? There are several alternatives. They fall into 2 general categories: actions at the federal level and actions at the state level. There are 3 basic federal level solutions, all of which have at their core that government should issue and control the quantity of money, and commercial banks can only lend out the money they actually have. British citizen James Robertson splits up the money power between 2 competing governmental bodies. The British government would publish monetary objectives approved by Parliament, for example, an inflation range of 2 to 3%. Then the Bank of England would create just enough debt-free money to achieve those objectives. It would then give this money to the government to spend into the economy by the normal budgetary process.
This is an agency of society. It's a public agency acting in the public interest, and it's acting in the public interest to achieve objectives given to it by the elected government. It should be at professional arm's length from the elected people themselves, because the legislators are going to try and get as much money as they can into their local economy. And if it's a question of a national election, they will want to manipulate decisions about the money supply in favor of keeping them in power. That seems to me, you can't ignore that fact. It's a fact of life.
Commercial banks would still be in operation, but could only lend out the money they have. Then they would have to compete for additional money on the open market, just as other corporations have to compete in the market to buy the materials they use. Lending out extra money that a bank didn't have would be considered a form of counterfeiting.
They would be prohibited from creating new money at all. And they would be competing, absolutely competing without subsidy, as they have now, competing with other banks to provide a better deal. Right. And what this would do, it would make the banks truly competitive, which they're certainly not at the moment. They're about the only huge industry that is subsidized to the level that they are. And also a competitive market for borrowing and lending would encourage new entrants to come in, much more than they can get in now, when the existing licensed banks are so highly subsidized by the permission that they are given to create new money.
Right. In other words, banks could only lend money they actually had.
Absolutely. And I think that that's the situation that the Central Monetary Authority should be in. It should create the money debt-free, and it should give it to the government to spend into circulation.
In Ellen Brown's solution, the government would create all the money debt-free.
The solution to all this is to return to the government-issued money of the American colonists, and particularly the colony of Pennsylvania, which had its own bank. Congress feels that they have to bail out the banking system, and the real reason is that we think that we're dependent on this banking system for our credit, but we're not. Like Dorothy and all the characters in The Wizard of Oz, we have the power to create our own money. The government's mentality in general seems to be, we'll do what we have to do and we'll worry about paying for it later. But what you could do is pay for it now. In other words, you don't have to pay for it later. You don't have to pay for it with debt. You can just pay for it with money.
In the Money Masters solution, the government creates all the money in the form of debt-free U.S. notes or their electronic equivalents, and then spends that money into existence through the normal budgetary process. Existing money is, of course, replaced one for one with the new debt-free money. The national debt is paid off with this new money as well, but to prevent inflation, reserve requirements are gradually raised on the commercial banks, requiring them to maintain 100% reserves. In other words, banks could then only loan out money they actually have.
I think that the solution is what I call $1 of capital, which is simply that you have to have $1 of capital against every unsecured asset you lend against. So if you're going to loan against a credit card, you have to have $1 of capital for every dollar that's outstanding in balance. If you're going to write loans against houses or against cars, you can write all the loans you want against the value of that asset, whatever that is. And as long as you do that, there's never a banking safety and soundness issue.
Solutions at the state level will be easier to achieve initially before reform at the federal level is politically possible. An interesting fact is you don't have to have a federal charter to create a bank. States can charter banks as well. All it takes is a bill passed by the state legislature. Many states already allow state-chartered banks. The state then deposits all their funds into their new bank and can then utilize the fractional reserve principle to their advantage by making loans to themselves for roads, bridges, etc. at no interest. When the loans are repaid, the money is extinguished from the system. The beauty of this system is you create wealth without creating a permanent increase in the money supply and the consequent inflation. During the Civil War, Virginia authorized counties to issue their own debt-free money. Since there was no gold, there would have been no money in circulation to maintain commerce. These surviving bills are tissue paper thin. Minnesota monetary reform expert Byron Dale has proposed legislation for Minnesota to charter a state bank which would be empowered to give the state government all the money necessary to provide infrastructure funding such as road building and repair without debt or interest.
My concept of money reform is just a little bit different, but it's only based upon the fact that for me personally, it's easier to work on my state legislators than it is my federal legislators. And of course, the solution to our problem is clearly money put into circulation without debt. Now, it really doesn't make any difference how you do it. It's just as long as the money comes into circulation without a debt to anybody and as a payment. The very concept of the bill is to simply have the banks create the money and spend it into circulation to build the infrastructure for the state.
This proposal is currently working its way through the Minnesota legislature with several bankers as sponsors. Actually, the state-owned bank idea is nothing new. The Bank of North Dakota is the only state-owned bank in America. It was created in 1919 as a populist movement swept through the debt-ridden farmers of the Northern Plains.